there'll be one or two things I maybe mentioned during the talk that seem a little bit scary, and I've been criticised for many, many years about scaring people over climate change. And I don't really set out to do that other than to try and give a sense of urgency. We do know what the answers are. We do know really how to get out of the state we're in, but we need the will and the urgency, and admittedly some quite substantial investment to do it. Now, we know that climate change is driven by carbon dioxide, and this is a plot of carbon dioxide over the last million years, roughly. Goes back 800,000 years here. The most of this plot is actually derived by analysing the tiny bubbles that get trapped in Antarctic ice. And if you drill down, which is done at Vostok in Antarctica, the further you drill down, the further back in history you go, and you can take the little bubbles out of the ice and analyse for carbon dioxide. So that's what is done here. From 1958 onwards, these are direct measurements from the Mauna Loa Observatory, which is on the top of a mountain in Hawaii. So it's virtually on the equator in the middle of the Pacific, and therefore remote from immediate emissions of carbon dioxide. And they've been measuring there since 1958. So you can see that carbon dioxide has gone bumped along around about 250 parts per million here for a million years. And then at the right-hand end, you can see it's increased rather substantially up to 411 parts per million the last time I looked on at the Mauna Loa Observatory website a few days ago. And it was the two scientists independently, Tyndall and Arrhenius, worked out at the end of the 1800s that putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere would warm the planet, and it's what keeps the Earth warm in the deep freeze of deep space. So it's pretty useful and pretty important to us. But Arrhenius in particular worked out using pretty simple models that if you doubled carbon dioxide, and we're heading that way, then the temperature of the Earth would rise by about 4 degrees centigrade. A fantastically good estimate, considering that's 120 years ago. So what actually has been happening, if we look here a little bit more up to date, a shorter time scale, sure, there's been a rise in temperatures, currently about 1 degree centigrade on average warmer across planet Earth from pre-industrial times. And one of the important things is the speed, the rate of that rise. That rise has been 1 degree centigrade in roughly 50 years. If you think back to the previous plot, which spanned a million years and therefore over several ice ages and coming in and out of ice ages, the fastest rise in temperature seen over that million years was 1 degree centigrade in 1,000 years. So temperature is rising faster now by 20 times than it ever has historically, and that has really important ecological effects. So as we know, there's some truly prodigious computer modeling done of what's going to happen to the Earth's temperature, and this is looking forward, this is Met Office results looking forward to the end of the century, 2100, and you can see there's a spread there because the predictions can't be exact, so there's a range of uncertainty, but the central estimate there is that we're heading for plus 3.5 degrees centigrade by the end of the century. So that's not the 1.5 degrees or even the 2 degrees that the Paris Agreement aims to achieve. It's 3.5 degrees, but admittedly the Paris Agreement has a ratchet mechanism by which countries around the world can increase and improve on their commitments to reducing emissions. And indeed at the Climate Change Conference, which was meant to happen in Glasgow of this November, countries were meant to submit their kind of ratchet commitments. That is how much better they were going to do than they stated in Paris 5 years ago now. Last count I saw, only 7 countries had done that, so that's 7 countries out of 197 that signed up to the Paris Agreement. So we've got some way to go. So, okay, temperatures are rising, they're rising very fast, and what's that doing the world over? Well, you'll know as well as me there's some pretty strange things going on. The top left-hand picture here is of a wildfire. This is Bogus Creek in the Yukon, right up in the Arctic Circle. Wildfires all over Siberia this summer, where it's been boiling hot, and that's releasing a lot of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So it prevents that wetland from absorbing carbon dioxide because you've burnt off the vegetation, and it's also putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So that's not a good thing to do, but it's also putting out a lot of smoke. And the picture on the top right-hand corner there is of the Greenland ice cap, and you can see not only is it melting, and melting rather worryingly fast, but you can see that the ice has gone black, and that is in part at least due to the deposits of smoke from wildfires like that. And interestingly, the albedo of that ice cap, at least there in patches, has decreased from 70% to 20%. That means that whereas previously, when it's white ice, snow, it reflects 70% of the sun's radiation back into the space, now it's only reflecting 20%. So it's absorbing a lot more sunlight and therefore accelerating warming, another kind of bad impact. Bottom left is a picture of peatlands in Scotland, and you can see that looks pretty damaged, pretty severely eroded, and there is a possibility that's driven by climate change, that we get warm, dry spells in summer, and peat is only there because our climate is cold and wet. And when it gets warm and dry, the water evaporates and the peat cracks. It loses its stability, it opens up, begins to oxidize and erodes away. And particularly when it's hit by heavy rainfall in the autumn and winter, the peat is just stripped off. And the peat is very, very high in carbon content, and that oxidizes into carbon dioxide and gets released into the atmosphere. So another bad kind of repercussion. And it's reckoned that about 5% of Scotland's peat cover is eroded rather like that at the moment. And if you do the calculations, if only 0.5% a year is eroded, then it's equivalent to all of our emissions in Scotland, our man-made emissions. So that's why there's quite a lot of money and effort going into restoring peatlands. Bottom right is a very recent photograph of an eruption of methane in Siberia. The permafrost is melting, and that allows the methane to explode out of the ground. That little crater there, by the way, is about 50 meters across. It's quite substantial, and there are loads of these occurring at the moment. So, you know, we're on a kind of dangerous path, and temperature's already beginning to affect the planet in many ways. This is a slightly old prediction of what will happen at various temperatures as they increase in the future. And if you remember back to an earlier slide, we're headed for 3.5 degrees centigrade by the end of the century. And if you can read the small writing there, if we do get to 3.5 degrees centigrade, then we'll find that all corals are extinct. Up to 52% of species are committed to extinction. The terrestrial biosphere becomes a carbon source. We'll come back to that in a moment, and there'll be major loss of the Amazon rainforest. So that's not a very happy prediction. But what is actually happening right now? If we look at these two plots, on the left hand is a plot of how biodiversity in the UK is doing. These plots are a little bit out of date, perhaps. I should update them. The one on the left, as I say, is UK, and it's an index based on species numbers, and this is for 200 priority species in the UK that are monitored, surveyed and monitored regularly. And there's been a 60% drop in species numbers over that period. And then the one on the bottom right is for the whole planet, and that is measuring 15,000 populations around the planet of 4,000 species, so an absolutely enormous effort. And that was updated just in the last week, and now the decline there is 68% in numbers. So again, not good. This is just, I'll only touch on this briefly. This is some work that I did just a few years back. If you remember, carbon dioxide for the planetary atmosphere is being monitored at Mauna Loa in Hawaii, and it's going up, as we saw in that earlier slide. But if you look very closely at the plot of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, you see that it's not just rising steadily. It is rising, obviously, but there's a kind of sawtooth effect in there, and that exploded view of the plot in the bottom right there shows that in the northern hemisphere summer, the carbon dioxide measured there on Hawaii actually drops. So over the annual cycle, it's rising, but during that summer months in the northern hemisphere, it drops. And that's roughly where we would be at the moment. This time of year is the bottom of that sawtooth. Why is that? It's because most of the landmass on planet Earth is in the northern hemisphere. There's much less in the southern hemisphere, and even what there is in the southern hemisphere is largely Antarctica, ice cap, and there's a lot of deserts actually. So the greatest part of the biosphere, that is the living plants and animals, occur in the northern hemisphere. And in our summer, all the plants and even the crops we grow in the forests put on leaves, and that absorbs carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. So it drops. And then in the autumn, round about now, the leaves start falling off. They fall on the ground and they biodegrade, and it releases carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. So you get this annual cycle. And that drop there is a direct measure of how well the planetary biosphere is functioning. How healthy is it? And it's always been reckoned that carbon dioxide increasing in the atmosphere is actually good for plants. It is a fertilizer. And it's always reckoned as the planet warms, then plants will grow further and further northwards up into the tundra and the Arctic Circle. Well, that was the case. And that drop was increasing, showing that the biosphere was more productive, if you like, up until 2006. And the analysis that I published, and it's been peer-reviewed, that's the only reason I'm mentioning it to you, shows that that peaked in 2006, and it's now either plateauing or just beginning to drop. So our biosphere is beginning to lose its ability to absorb carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Why is that? Well, it could be a number of reasons. It could just be poor land management by us, but it could be things like wildfires. It could be the spread of pests and diseases. It could be drought and heat waves. It could be floods. It could be severe storms and wind throw of forests and so on. So any number of possible reasons. So we are kind of abusing our planet. We're overusing the Earth's resources, and all the plots on the right-hand side there show loads of things going up, things like international trade, the GDP, carbon dioxide, of course, and agricultural production, all, but the planet doesn't get any bigger. And indeed, the amount of land surface that each of us can kind of draw on because of rising populations is reducing. And currently, each of us per head has about 1.8 hectares of the planet on which we should be surviving. So we've got to find a bit of a solution to this problem. And Planet Earth didn't actually come with an instruction manual, and unlike other faulty equipment, which you can just bang on the side or switch on and off and see if it works again, we can't with the planet. So what do? Well, the traditional kind of answer is that we should be seeking sustainability in everything we do, and in all our new developments, we should be looking for that ideal sweet spot in the middle there, which means when we develop a new project, it should deliver benefits for the economy, benefits for society, and benefits for the environment. I don't particularly like that mind map, if you like. That overlap, that area in the middle can be as small as you like. And it also immediately makes you start thinking about trade-offs. If we build a new motorway, then, you know, that's good for the economy, and it's good for society in a way that it lets us get around more quickly. But okay, it damages the environment a bit. But we got 2 out of 3, so that's not bad. I hate that kind of thinking. There's one phrase I hate, it's trade-offs. So, but that social element is really important. And if you look at this diagram, it's a little bit complicated, but this is countries around the world And it shows up the right-hand axis the ecological footprint of those countries around the world. So the ones at the top there, the UK will be up there somewhere. The US is probably the highest there. And along the horizontal axis is human development. So, you know, what we've done is we've been extremely greedy for the planet's resources. But we have at least used that to develop social benefits, and the Human Development Index of those planets that are using the most resources is better. So we've gone up that diagonal upward right-hand arrow. What we need to do now is actually come vertically down. We've got to reduce our greediness for the planet's resources, but keep the good life. And the EU did set an objective not that long ago of, quote, living well within the limits of our planet. So we want to live well, but we've got to do that in order, if we intend to stay on this planet, we've got to do that within the limits of the planet. Historically, you know, there's maybe a reason that we are in the position we are, because thousands of years ago, it was quite a good idea for mankind to try and control his immediate environments. We were subject to epidemics, well, we still are, aren't we? But particularly we were exposed to storms, floods, droughts, heat, cold, starvation, and predators. So there was every incentive for us to start controlling our immediate environment. And then more recently, and it is really relatively very recently, we began to put, through democratic processes, controls to limit our domination or over-exploitation or damage of the environment. And I think it's only very recently we've begun to realize that the environment is actually essential to maintain our health and maintain our lifestyles. So a very radical shift in thinking quite recently. And this is the model of sustainable development that I much prefer, that encapsulates that thinking, really. This is taken from the European Environment Agency. And in effect, this is saying that, and we've all heard this, that a healthy economy needs a healthy society, and a healthy society needs a healthy environment. So there's no opportunity to think about trade-offs here. We must seek out multiple benefits. So whatever we do to improve the economy also improves society and improves the environment. So who's responsible for taking all of these actions and creating a better world? This is a survey, again, a little bit out of date, but I don't imagine the numbers will have changed much. And a lot of people think that the government should take responsibility for actions to improve the situation, and that's certainly true, but it's shared around. Companies need to take responsibility, environmental groups such as yourselves, and individuals. So every one of us has to be involved in this. And some years ago, my wife and I actually created an eco store in the centre of Glasgow called End Trading. And the whole point of that store, which also had an associated 100% organic and vegetarian cafe, was to do the hard work and take the difficulty out of each of us trying to do our bit to improve the environment. So we would stock and sell what we thought was the one best environmental product, be that a tumble dryer, washing machines, do-it-yourself products, clothing, as you can see, footwear, everything. It was, for shorthand, we used to call it the John Lewis of the environment. So each of us in the Western world lives what we call a 3-planet lifestyle. We're not using 1.6 hectares of the planet to sustain ourselves, but as it says here in the top right-hand corner, we're actually using 5.4 hectares. We are grossly over-consuming the planetary resources. We're being overly greedy. You can measure your footprint online very easily, and I've done it. And in the left-hand box there, it shows, and this is what my typical lifestyle probably is. It's 2.5 Earths. So I'm not quite 3, but I really can't be very proud of that. And I actually do quite a lot of reasonable things. I've got photovoltaics on the house. I only consume green renewable electricity. I've got pretty good insulation. I run an electric car. Very rarely do we use processed foods and so on, but I suppose the killer for me is that now the family's left, we do live in quite a big house, and it's a Victorian house, so its energy efficiency is probably pretty low anyway. But one of the killers is that my wife is Greek, so we normally would travel to Greece twice a year, and that really knocks my footprint. When we were running the shop, I got down to 2.05 planet living, but I did it just now, considering my current lifestyle due to COVID, because of course I don't go anywhere. I've been pretty obsessive about isolation, and my footprint now is 1.9 Earths. So it is reckoned generally that our 3-planet Earth can be reduced to 2 planets by personal choice, by what you consume and the way you live your life. But to get down to 1 planet, which is sustainability, it needs government intervention as well. And I think these figures kind of do substantiate that. So we can make personal choices. There's things the community can do as well. And you'll probably amongst yourselves know a lot more about community action than me. But this is a nice example, I think, the Glasgow Tool Library, where people donate tools that they probably end up not using very much, stored in the attic. And you can go along and borrow them like you would borrow a book from a library. A wonderful concept. And it's quite a significant element in what is termed the circular economy. The circular economy is all about reducing our greed for resources. So sharing items is part of that, but redesigning items so you don't throw them away, so that you can reuse them. They can be upgraded. As a last resort, actually, they can be recycled, but to keep products in use for as long as possible by as many people as possible. That's what the circular economy is about. And Zero Waste Scotland has suggested that full adoption of a circular economy in Scotland would reduce carbon emissions by 20% anyway. And actually, it's an economy that has very high job content, and if you choose to measure things by GDP, actually delivers a very high GDP as well. So those are some of the things that we can do personally. It's some of the things, just touching on it, that we can do as communities locally. But I did just want to, as I come to a kind of close, think about something that government would be required to stimulate, but equally the whole built environment sector could undertake, start delivering key elements of the circular economy. You know, the built environment is really important. It's where we live. It has a really important impact on us socially and health-wise. There's a white paper just been released in Westminster, and there's a little quote from it, if I can give you that. It says, we should ensure that homes and buildings we work and live in positively contribute to our physical and mental health instead of diminishing it. You know, that's a pretty damning comment, isn't it? That we have a built environment that actually diminishes our physical and mental health. So we do end up with a fairly poor built environment, and buildings that we live in or work in generally create about 35% of CO2 emissions, and everything to do with the built environment is about 20% of GDP. So it's a really, really important sector. And this diagram on the right is what I've termed a cycle of blame. I tried in my previous work that I've retired from, to get everyone involved in the built environment in Scotland together to look at this cycle of blame, where everyone around that cycle blames everyone else for why we end up with such a poor built environment. The architects will blame the developers, the construction companies will blame the architects, and people who demolish buildings will blame the construction companies for it being a building that you can't really recycle anything from. So we end up with a terrible environment that's not good to live in and is just ridiculously unsustainable. And there are ways of addressing that. You know, the city of Pompeii was built with bricks and mortars, and we still do that today. Surely we can improve on that and together create a cycle of support, bringing that whole sector together so that every element of it, the developers, the architects, the landscape architects, the building control people, the planning control people, the construction companies, the people who fit buildings out, the people who run and manage buildings, the people who eventually take buildings apart, all get together and encourage each other to create a better built environment. And in the process of doing that, the deconstructed materials are reused to construct new buildings, and the fitting out is done with the kind of products that are built from recycled material, and everything, of course, low energy and with as low a planetary footprint as possible. So it is all about developing the circular economy, which absolutely must be the solution to our overuse, our greed for the Earth's natural resources, and that will deliver significant benefits for the planet in terms both of resource use, in terms of biodiversity, and in terms of tackling climate change. But none of that can be done without partnership. And I referred to that built environment sector because it's not impossible. The Scotch whisky industry is a really, really good example. Go back 15 years and it was an industry in denial of its environmental impact. And through its trade association, the Scotch Whisky Association, they declared a non-competitive zone around improving their environmental footprint and delivering sustainability. And they all encourage each other and share knowledge on how to do that. And the Scotch whisky industry is still ruthless in its competitiveness in marketing its products all over the world. But it is genuinely hugely impressive at encouraging each other to deliver better environmental performance. And it is genuinely a world leader these days. So it can be done. And it comes down to all of us working together in partnership, and all of us individually and in every way we can being leaders as well. Thank you very much.